You know, when it comes to free speech, things can get really heated really fast. And you see this maybe nowhere more than on college campuses, especially when controversial figures like Charlie Kirk show up. So today, what we're going to do is cut through all that noise. We'll use these intense debates as a kind of case study to demystify one of America's most important, and let's be honest, most misunderstood rights, the First Amendment. So what does the law actually say? Let's break it down.
You know, this really is the question at the heart of everything. We all throw the term free speech around, but what are the actual rules? What does the law protect? And maybe more importantly, who does it protect you from? The answer might not be what you think. All right, let's dive into our case study. You probably heard of Charlie Kirk and his organization, Turning Point USA. They make a point of visiting college campuses, and their events often challenge the prevailing culture there. And because of that, they almost always become these huge flashpoints, sparking protests and really intense arguments about what kind of speech is or isn't okay in those spaces. So what you have here are two totally competing arguments. On one side, Kirk's supporters are saying, hey, universities are shutting down conservative viewpoints. But on the other side, critics say protesting and pushing back is also a form of free speech. So, to figure out who has the stronger legal leg to stand on, we've got to go straight to the source.
And this brings us to the absolute core of this whole thing. Let's just forget the shouting matches and the social media drama for a second. Because there is one single legal principle, a golden rule, you could call it, that clears up almost every single one of these free speech fights.
And here it is, the First Amendment. The key phrase, the part that matters most, is Congress shall make no law. See, from the very beginning, this amendment was designed as a shield. It was a restriction on one entity and one entity only. The government. It's not about your boss, it's not about your neighbor, and it's not about a private company. It is all about what the government can and cannot do to your speech.
So, look, if you remember one thing, make it this. The First Amendment applies to government actors. We're talking public universities, the police, any branch of state or federal government. But, and this is huge, it does not apply to private actors. That means private companies, private universities, or social media platforms. They get to create their own rules for speech. This distinction is, and I mean this, everything. Okay, so now that we have this golden rule, let's take it and apply it to our campus scenarios. This is where the abstract legal stuff starts to get very, very real.
All right, scenario one. Charlie Kirk is scheduled to speak at a big state school. Think the University of California or the University of Texas. Because these are public, government-funded institutions, they are bound by the First Amendment. That means they can't just cancel his speech because they don't like his message. Doing that would be what's called viewpoint discrimination, and it's a textbook constitutional violation. But now, let's flip it. Scenario two. He's invited to a private university, say like a Harvard or a Stanford. A private university is more like a private club, or even your own house. It can set its own rules. So if that school decides his message violates its campus speech code and they cancel the event, well, they haven't violated the First Amendment because they're not the government.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because it introduces this fascinating legal idea: what if a crowd gets so rowdy that the university's afraid there's going to be violence? This is called the heckler's veto. The Supreme Court has been super clear on this. For public universities, the answer isn't to silence the speaker. Their job is to protect the speaker and handle the crowd. You can't let hecklers get a veto on someone else's speech. But that kind of begs another question, right? Is all speech protected?
Well, the short answer is no, not quite. The First Amendment isn't a free-for-all. There are a few very specific, very narrow categories of speech that are not protected. For instance, incitement isn't just saying something that makes people angry. It's literally trying to get people to take immediate illegal action, like, hey everyone, let's go burn down that building right now. The key takeaway here is that the bar for what's considered unprotected speech is incredibly high. That's why most political speech, even if you find it offensive, gets the absolute highest level of protection.
So, we've been focused on campuses, but let's be real for a minute. Most of today's free speech battles aren't happening on a college quad. They're happening right here, online. And that shifts the entire debate into a totally new arena with a whole different set of rules.
You hear this argument all the time, right? People, including Charlie Kirk, argue that platforms like X, YouTube, and TikTok, they're not just websites anymore. They've effectively become our modern public square, the place where public debate actually happens. And if that's the case, what does it mean when they get to decide who speaks and who doesn't?
And that leads us to this massive question, one the Founding Fathers couldn't possibly have imagined. You have these private, for-profit companies that have just an enormous amount of power over public conversation. Suddenly, this isn't just a legal question about the First Amendment anymore. It's this huge cultural and political question about where power lies in the digital age.
But for now, let's just stick to the legal reality. When a platform like YouTube or X suspends an account, we have to go right back to our golden rule. Are they the government? Nope. They're private companies. And because of that, their actions are not a First Amendment violation. They're just enforcing their own terms of service.
So if a lot of these fights aren't actually about the Constitution, then what are they about? Well, this is where we go beyond the legal text. This is a debate about the kind of society we want to be and what our cultural norms for speech ought to look like.
You've probably heard this classic idea of free expression before, and it's so important. It's easy, right? It's easy to defend speech that we agree with. The real test of our commitment to free speech is whether we are willing to defend the right of people to say things we find offensive or wrong or even hateful. That's the hard part.
Look, if you take away just one thing from all this, let it be this question. The next time you see a free speech controversy blow up online or in the news, just ask yourself this: who is doing the restricting? If it's the government or a public university, then the First Amendment is absolutely in play. If it's a private company, a private school, or a group of protesters, well, then it's a totally different debate.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. The legal lines might be pretty clear, but the cultural questions, they're anything but. As we try to navigate this really complex landscape, the challenge for all of us is to decide if our goal is to truly protect the principle of free expression for everyone, or just for the voices that happen to agree with us.